I am Joshua, 32 years old, and my own father tried to completely destroy my reputation and my life's work in front of my entire community. Before I tell you about how I turned the tables and exposed his lies in front of the board of directors, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It's funny how the worst moments of your life often start in the most mundane, predictable settings. The community hall that night smelled exactly like it had for the last 20 years. A suffocating mix of stale, burnt coffee, cheap lemon floor wax, and the heavy scent of forced family interactions. It was one of those routine, semi-annual family and neighborhood gatherings that happen every few months. The room was packed with familiar faces, polite smiles, and the kind of small talk that rarely meant anything real. I had learned a long time ago exactly how to exist in those rooms. Keep your posture steady. Keep a polite, neutral smile plastered on your face. Stick to the edges of the room, near the exits or the refreshment table. Don't draw attention. Answer questions with polite, non-committal phrases. Just get through the evening, survive the 2 hours of pretending we were a normal, happy family, and then go home to my actual life. That strategy of invisibility had worked flawlessly for years, until that night, until my father, Robert, decided that the silence was no longer serving him, and he needed a spectacle. I was standing near the back wall, quietly sipping a glass of ice water, watching the room. My father was standing about 30 feet away, holding court with a group of my older relatives and some of the community board members. He loved an audience. He thrived on it. I saw him glance my way. His eyes locked onto mine, and I saw a dark, familiar shift in his expression. The mask of the genial, charming patriarch slipped just a fraction of an inch. Without breaking eye contact with me, his voice suddenly rose. He didn't just speak loudly. He projected his voice from his chest, carrying it over the hum of 50 different conversations. You'll never amount to anything, Joshua. The room went completely, devastatingly still. It was like someone had pulled the plug on the building's power. You could actually feel the shift in the air pressure instantly. Conversations died mid-sentence, the words hanging awkwardly in the quiet. Someone dropped a plastic fork, and it sounded like a gunshot. People shifted uncomfortably, staring at the scuffed linoleum floor or suddenly pretending to check their phones. My father didn't soften his tone. He didn't look away, and he didn't try to play it off as a joke. He stood there, chest puffed out, waiting for my reaction. He meant every single word, and he wanted everyone in that hall to hear it. He wanted to break me publicly. Standing right next to him was my older brother, Dylan. Dylan, the golden child. Dylan, who had never done a wrong thing in his life according to my parents. I could see Dylan's shoulders relax, and a faint, almost imperceptible smirk played on the corner of his lips. He was enjoying this. He was feeding off my humiliation. I felt the heat rise in the back of my neck, that familiar, burning sting of public humiliation that my father loved to inflict whenever he felt he was losing control over me. My heart hammered against my ribs. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to defend myself, to shout back, to list my accomplishments, to tear him down right there in front of his precious audience. But I didn't. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I didn't give them the emotional explosion, the messy breakdown they were so desperately waiting for. I took a slow, deep breath. I let the silence stretch out, letting the sheer awkwardness of my father's outburst hang around his own neck. I looked directly into his eyes, let a small, calm smile cross my face, and said softly, but clearly enough for the front row to hear, "Maybe you're right." I didn't wait for his response. I set my plastic cup down on the nearest folding table. I reached into my pocket, my fingers wrapping around the cold metal of my keys, and I walked straight toward the double doors. I didn't storm out. I didn't slam the doors behind me. No drama. No tears. Just absolute, impenetrable silence. The cool, crisp night air hit my face the second I stepped out of the building. I walked across the gravel parking lot, the sound of my footsteps the only noise in the quiet night. I unlocked my black Porsche 911. I got in, sinking into the cold leather seat, and gripped the steering wheel. My knuckles were white, and my jaw was aching from how hard I was clenching my teeth, but my breathing remained steady. I inserted the key, started the engine, and the deep, throaty roar of the exhaust broke the quiet of the parking lot. I put it in gear and drove away. I never once looked in the rearview mirror. I drove around the city for an hour, letting the speed and the hum of the engine calm my nerves. I thought that was the end of it. I thought it was just another toxic family night I had successfully escaped, another boundary I had maintained. But the real damage didn't happen in that brightly lit room. It happened in the shadows, long after I had left. Hours later, I was sitting alone in my dark living room, staring at the city lights through my window. The house was dead quiet. Suddenly, my phone buzzed violently against the glass coffee table. It was a text message from my Uncle John. Uncle John usually kept his head down and stayed out of family politics, so a late-night text from him was rare. There were just 3 short sentences on the screen. "Are you awake? Do you know what your father did after you left?" My chest tightened immediately. Cold knot formed in my stomach. I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over the screen, and I typed back a single word. "What?" The 3 gray typing dots appeared on the screen. They danced, disappeared, and reappeared, as if Uncle John was pacing his kitchen, struggling to figure out how to say what he needed to say. When his next message finally came through, it set off a chain of events that would pull back the curtain on decades of lies and change my life forever. To truly understand the gravity of what my father did that night, you have to understand how a man like Robert operates. My father is not a man who throws physical punches. He doesn't break dishes when he's angry, and he rarely raises his voice. He is a covert operator, a maestro of manipulation. He uses calm, polite concern as a weapon to systematically dismantle the lives and reputations of anyone who dares to step out of line. Growing up, the dynamic in our household was drawn with thick, permanent markers. My older brother, Dylan, was the undisputed golden child. Dylan could do no wrong, and if he did, it was somehow the world's fault. When Dylan got a DUI in his senior year, my mother, Margaret, cried and blamed the police officer for targeting him. My father quietly hired an expensive lawyer, got the charges reduced, and bought Dylan a new car to help him recover from the trauma. When it came time for college, the stark reality of my place in the family was made clear. The entire college fund, money my grandparents had contributed to for both of us, magically went entirely to Dylan's out-of-state tuition and frat house fees. When I asked about my share, my father sat me down in his study, put on a face of deep, paternal disappointment, and told me that character is built through struggle. I was told I needed to take out student loans and work double shifts at a diner to pay for local community college. I didn't complain. I didn't beg. I worked. I took those diner shifts, I studied late into the night, and I built my wealth quietly. I started investing early, making smart, aggressive moves in real estate and tech startups, while my family thought I was just doing some computer stuff. I kept my head down, my mouth shut, and my bank accounts strictly private. To my family, I was just Joshua, the disappointment. They had no idea about my actual net worth. They didn't know the Porsche was paid for in cash. My father had sneered and dismissed it as a reckless, overpriced lease that would eventually bankrupt me. I let him believe it. But my father's real, terrifying talent wasn't just favoritism. It was calculated destruction. I saw it happen 10 years ago to a very close family friend named Luke. It happened right after my grandfather's funeral. Emotions were high, and Luke and my father had a minor disagreement about the estate handling and some properties. It wasn't explosive. It was just a difference of opinion over a few beers. But my father didn't let things go. He never did. Over the next 6 months, I watched my father systematically, patiently ruin Luke's life. He never yelled at Luke. He never confronted him openly. Instead, he would corner mutual friends at social events, put his hand on their shoulder, put on a face of deep, agonizing concern, and whisper about Luke's erratic behavior and financial instability. He made quiet phone calls to Luke's business partners, framing them as wellness checks. "I'm just so worried about him," my father would say, his voice thick with fake empathy. "He hasn't been the same since the funeral. Just be careful with your investments with him right now. He seems unstable." The poison worked perfectly because it was delivered with a smile. People slowly pulled away from Luke. His business partnerships dried up because no one wanted to risk their money on an unstable man. The financial stress broke his marriage, leading to a bitter, agonizing divorce. I still remember the look in Luke's eyes during the brutal custody battle over his 2 kids. He looked like a man who was drowning, and the worst part was, no one could trace the collapse back to my father. Robert never left a fingerprint. He just planted the seeds of doubt, watered them with fake concern, and watched the house burn down from a safe distance. I learned back then that my father didn't need to control people directly. He controlled the narrative. And once people believed his version of events, the truth simply didn't matter anymore. Sitting in my living room, staring at Uncle John's text, that old, familiar dread washed over me like ice water. I knew the pattern. Whenever someone challenged my father or humiliated him by refusing to play his game, like I had just done by walking away, the consequences always appeared later. Quietly, invisibly. My phone vibrated in my hand. It was an incoming call from Uncle John. I answered it immediately. "Joshua." His voice was hushed, raspy, like he was hiding in a coat closet. "I didn't want to put this all in a text. I stayed behind to help clean up. After you drove off, your dad didn't just go back to the party. He went straight to the hall organizers." "To do what?" I asked, rubbing my temples, trying to ward off the headache building behind my eyes. "He filed an incident report," John said, his voice trembling slightly. I overheard him talking to Nathan by the kitchen doors. "Joshua, he didn't describe it as a family argument. He told Nathan you had a severe psychological break. He said you were acting aggressive, threatening, and that he was deeply concerned for the physical safety of the community members." I stopped breathing for a second. "He called me a safety threat?" "He was so calm about it," John warned, "like he was reporting a broken window or a gas leak. He told them you needed professional help and shouldn't be allowed on the premises." Nathan wrote it all down. "It's on an official internal report now." I thanked John, my voice hollow, and hung up the phone. I sat in the dark, the blue light of the screen illuminating my hands. My father had just branded me a volatile, dangerous threat in the very community center where I ran my largest philanthropic project. He was using the exact same playbook he used on Luke, but this time he was using it on his own son. I didn't sleep a single minute that night. I sat at my kitchen island, the house silent around me, drinking cup after cup of black coffee, waiting for the inevitable fallout. When dealing with a man like Robert, the punishment is never delayed for long. He strikes while the iron is hot, while the shock is still fresh. At exactly 8 a.m. sharp, the silence of my kitchen was broken. My laptop chimed with the sharp, bright sound of a new email. I pulled the screen toward me. The sender was Nathan, the lead community organizer and the man my father had spoken to the night before. The subject line was written in bold, unfeeling text. "Urgent. Temporary suspension of project activities." I clicked it open, my eyes scanning the text. The email was short, incredibly formal, and devastatingly polite. "Dear Joshua, due to recent and severe concerns brought to our attention regarding community safety and appropriate conduct, your participation in the downtown revitalization project is being placed on an immediate administrative hold. We take all reports of aggressive and unstable behavior very seriously to protect our members. A board meeting will be scheduled later this week to review your standing. Until then, please do not access the facility or contact project volunteers. Regards, Nathan." That was it. That was the whole message. No request for my side of the story. No benefit of the doubt for the 2 years of flawless work I had put in. Just a cold, hard pause that quietly erased an opportunity one had spent countless hours building from the ground up. I slowly closed the laptop. My chest felt incredibly heavy, a physical weight pressing down on my lungs, but strangely, my mind was incredibly clear. My father had calculated this perfectly. He knew exactly how much the downtown revitalization project meant to me. It was my passion project, my way of giving back to the city, of building a legacy completely outside of his suffocating shadow. And with a single 5-minute, calmly spoken conversation, he had weaponized the system against me. Before I could even process my next move, my phone buzzed again. This time, the caller ID flashed the name, Aunt Sarah. Aunt Sarah was my father's younger sister, and she was notorious in our family for playing both sides. She was the ultimate flying monkey, a woman who loved drama disguised as sympathy, who gathered information to report back to the patriarch. "Joshua, sweetie," she cooed the absolute second I answered the phone. Her voice was dripping with thick, sugary concern. "I am just so worried about you. Are you feeling okay today?" "I'm fine, Sarah. Why wouldn't I be?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly flat and giving her absolutely nothing to work with. "Well, your father called me first thing this morning." She sighed heavily, laying it on thick. "He is just sick with worry over you. He said you had a terrible, frightening outburst last night. And, well, he felt he had a moral obligation to protect the project. He even called Carter on the executive board this morning to give him a heads up about your mental state." I froze. The coffee in my stomach turned to acid. Carter was a rival board member who had always hated my influence in the community project. He was a ruthless corporate climber who desperately wanted total control over the project's massive budget so he could secure his own promotion within the city council. If my father had called Carter directly, this wasn't just a minor incident report anymore. This wasn't just my dad being petty. This was a targeted, strategic assassination of my character. "He called Carter?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain perfectly steady, not letting her hear the spike of adrenaline in my blood. "Only out of love, Joshua," Sarah defended quickly, sensing the shift in my tone. "He just thinks you need professional help before you completely ruin your career and embarrass the family further." "Thanks for the update, Sarah," I said, and ended the call before she could say another word. I stood up, walked over to the large bay window, and looked out at my driveway. The Porsche was gleaming under the morning sun. I had bought that car with money I earned through brutal hard work, sleepless nights, and smart decisions. The moment I walked through the glass double doors of the office, I could feel the atmosphere shift. It was instantly thick, suffocating. Conversations stopped abruptly. The receptionist, a woman who usually greeted me every morning with a bright smile and asked about my weekend, suddenly found her computer keyboard intensely fascinating. She wouldn't even make eye contact with me. I walked straight past the front desk, heading down the hallway toward my associate's office. Qley had been my right hand on this project for over a year. We had spent countless late nights going over blueprints, arguing over budget allocations, and securing permits. I trusted her. I considered her a genuine friend. Her office door was wide open. She was frantically packing files into a leather briefcase, her movements jerky and nervous. "Qley," I said, stepping into the doorway. She jumped, gasping softly, her eyes darting nervously past me toward the open hallway. "Joshua, oh my God, you really shouldn't be here." "I got Nathan's email," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "I need you to forward me the budget projections and the vendor contracts for the Friday review so I can prepare a defense for the board." Qley wouldn't look me in the eye. She grabbed a stack of manila folders, hugged them tightly to her chest like a shield, and backed away from her desk. "I can't do that, Josh. I really can't. Carter just had a closed-door meeting with me. He's taking over as interim director, effective immediately. He said if I share any internal documents with a suspended member, my salary will be docked, and I can completely forget about my promotion next quarter." "Qley, look at me," I said, stepping closer, trying to find the friend I knew. "You know me. You know I've never been aggressive a single day in my life. You know my family dynamics. You know this is a setup to push me out." "I don't know anything," she snapped, her voice trembling, finally looking up at me with panicked eyes. I just know what Carter told me. Your dad called him, Josh. Your own dad. Why would a father lie about his own son being dangerous and unstable? I have a mortgage to pay. I have a kid in school. I can't be associated with a liability right now. I'm sorry. She pushed past me, keeping her head down, and hurried down the hall. I stood there in her empty office, taking in the bitter, stinging reality of fair-weather loyalty. When the wind blows hard enough, people will always protect their own shelter first. Well, if it isn't the liability himself. I turned around slowly. Carter was standing at the end of the hall, wearing a smug, perfectly tailored gray suit, holding a cup of artisanal coffee. He walked toward me with the unearned, arrogant confidence of a man who thought he had just won the lottery without buying a ticket. You received the email, Joshua? Carter said, taking a slow sip of his coffee, a patronizing smile on his face. You are trespassing on office property. You're moving incredibly fast, Carter, I replied, crossing my arms, refusing to give him an inch of intimidation, bypassing every single board protocol to seize a project you didn't build and don't know how to run. I'm protecting the community's assets from unstable elements. Carter smiled smoothly, his teeth showing. Your father was very, very forthcoming this morning. Takes a lot of courage for a family member to report a psychological breakdown. The emergency board meeting is scheduled for tomorrow at noon. We will vote on your permanent expulsion and the restructuring of the project's leadership. I strongly suggest you don't attend. It will only embarrass you further. I didn't argue with him. I didn't raise my voice or defend my sanity. I just stared at him, my face a mask of stone, committing his smug, triumphant expression to memory. I left the office and drove straight to a private, members-only club across town. I needed a war room. I sat in a dark leather booth in the back corner and waited. 10 minutes later, my business partner and closest friend, Elijah, slid into the booth across from me. Elijah was a shark in a tailored suit. He handled the legal and operational side of my private investment firm. He knew where every body was buried, and he knew how to dig them up. I got your text, Elijah said, immediately signaling the waiter for 2 black coffees. You said it was code red. What's the situation? I laid it all out for him. The family party, the shout, the walkout, my father's quiet, devastating report, Carter's hostile takeover at the office. Elijah listened quietly, his fingers steepled in front of him, his eyes sharp. When I finished, he let out a low, impressed whistle. Your old man is a piece of work. He's trying to trigger a morality and fitness clause to force you out of your own project. He thinks I'm just an employee of the fund, I said quietly. He thinks Carter actually has the power to fire me. Elijah smirked, a dangerous, predatory glint in his eye. He doesn't know you own the entire foundation through the holding company. No, I said softly. He doesn't, and neither does Carter. But before we drop that bomb and nuke their entire reality, I need to know exactly what happened after I left that hall last night. I need undeniable proof of the lie. Leave that to me, Elijah said, pulling out his phone and scrolling through his contacts. I know a guy who owes me a favor. That evening, under the cover of darkness, Elijah arranged a discreet meeting for me at the back entrance of the community hall. The building was completely dark, closed down for the night. Standing by the heavy metal security door, holding a flashlight, was Wyatt, the head of building security. Wyatt was a massive, intimidating ex-Marine. He was a no-nonsense guy whose salary was, unbeknownst to the board, secretly paid by a subsidiary of my holding company to ensure the facility remained top-tier and safe. He was intensely loyal. Mr. Joshua, Wyatt nodded respectfully, swiping his master keycard to let us in. I got Elijah's message. I pulled the archives from the servers from last night. We walked silently down the dark, quiet corridors into the small, windowless security room in the basement. Ranks of monitors glowed in the dark, casting a pale blue light across Wyatt's scarred face. He sat down at the main console and tapped the keyboard rapidly. I heard what Nathan put in that official report, Wyatt said, keeping his eyes glued to the screen, his jaw tight. Said you got violent. Said you were throwing chairs, threatening guests, screaming. I knew it was absolute garbage the second I heard the rumor mill spinning. You funded my kid's medical surgery last year anonymously, but I knew it was you. You don't throw chairs. He clicked a mouse, and the large main screen on the wall brought up the footage from the banquet hall. It was high-definition camera work, complete with surprisingly decent audio from the overhead security microphones. Here is the exact moment you left, Wyatt said, hitting the play button. I stood in the dark room and watched myself on the screen. I saw my father yell, his face contorted in anger. I saw the entire room go dead silent. I saw my own calm, steady smile, and I watched myself walk out the double doors. No thrown chairs, no raised fists, no screaming, just a quiet, dignified exit. Okay, that clears you, Wyatt said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. But now watch this. This is the part that made me sick. He fast-forwarded the video by about 3 minutes. The screen showed the hall after my departure. People were murmuring, forming small, gossiping clusters. My father, Robert, was standing near the buffet table, looking annoyed that his grand spectacle hadn't resulted in a screaming match. And right beside him, leaning in close, looking around nervously, was my brother, Dylan. Wyatt boosted the audio feed. The sound crackled with static for a second, then cleared up perfectly. Dylan's voice echoed loudly in the small security room. He embarrassed you, Dad. He just walked away. You can't let him just walk away like he's better than us. People are staring. My father scowled on the screen, crossing his arms. What do you want me to do, Dylan? Make a scene? Chase him into the parking lot? No, Dylan said, his voice dropping to a sinister, eager whisper. Go talk to Nathan. Right now. Tell him Joshua was acting erratic. Tell him you felt physically threatened. If you say he's unstable, it goes on an official record. It'll ruin his standing with the board. It will get him kicked out of that stupid project he loves so much. Do it now while people are still shocked. I'll back up everything you say. My father looked at Dylan. On the screen, I watched a slow, ugly, calculating smile spread across my father's face. Unstable, my father whispered, testing the word. Yes, that works perfectly. I stood frozen in the security room. The air in my lungs felt incredibly thin. It was one thing to know, logically, that my father was a manipulator. I had accepted that years ago. But seeing Dylan, my own brother, the golden child who always pretended to be the innocent peacekeeper of the family, actively orchestrating my downfall out of pure, unadulterated jealousy, that was a different kind of darkness. It was a knife directly to the back. Dylan didn't just want the family inheritance or our parents' approval. He wanted me erased. He wanted me ruined so he wouldn't have to look at my success. You want a copy of this burned to a flash drive? Wyatt asked, turning around in his chair, looking up at me with concern. Put it on a secure drive, I said, my voice sounding completely foreign, like it belonged to a stranger, and email an encrypted link directly to Elijah's server. Elijah stepped forward and clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. We have them, Josh. We have them dead to rights. It's over. No, I said, staring hard at the paused frame of my father and brother smiling together, conspiring to destroy me. It's not over. It's just starting. The next morning, 3 hours before the emergency board meeting was scheduled to begin, I pulled out my phone and sent a group text to both my father and Dylan. Meet me at the Oak Street Diner. 9 a.m. We need to talk before things go too far today. I arrived early and took a booth in the far back corner, away from the windows. The diner was quiet, smelling of frying bacon, old coffee, and maple syrup. The waitress filled my mug and left me alone. I needed to do this. I needed to look them in the eyes one last time and give them a final, ultimate chance to pull back from the ledge. Not for their sake, they didn't deserve it, but for my own peace of mind. I needed to know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that there was absolutely nothing left in them worth saving. At exactly 9:05 a.m., the little bell above the diner door jingled cheerfully. Robert and Dylan walked in. They looked incredibly relaxed, triumphant even. My father was wearing his favorite casual sweater, and Dylan was checking his phone with a bored expression. They spotted me and slid into the vinyl booth across from me. "Joshua?" my father said, instantly slipping into his soft, terribly concerned voice. He folded his hands neatly on the Formica table. "I'm so glad you reached out to us. We are very, very worried about you, son." "Are you?" I asked, picking up my mug and taking a slow sip of the scalding black coffee. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like you're trying to destroy my career and ruin my name." Dylan leaned forward, putting his elbows on the table, putting on his best caring older brother face. "Josh, come on, man. Dad was just doing what was best for the community. You were totally out of control last night. You scared people. You need professional help, and we want to support you getting it." "Out of control." I repeated the words flatly, rolling them around in my mouth. I looked directly into my father's eyes. "I said exactly 3 words to you, turned around, and walked to my car. That is what you classify as out of control." My father sighed heavily, running a hand over his face in a masterclass of theatrical, exhausting patience. "You're overreacting, Joshua. Your perception of events is highly skewed right now. You seemed very agitated. Your eyes were wild. If people at the project are drawing their own conclusions about your mental fitness, that's not my responsibility. I just reported what I saw to keep people safe." He was gaslighting me to my face. Smooth, perfectly practiced, and without a single solitary drop of guilt. It was horrifyingly impressive. "I know exactly what you did, Dad," I said, leaning closer across the table, dropping my voice to a dangerous murmur. "I know you talked to Carter this morning. I know you're trying to use my project as leverage to humiliate me publicly. I'm giving you both one chance. One final opportunity. Call Nathan right now. Retract the statement before the noon meeting, and we walk away from this table, and from each other peacefully." Dylan scoffed loudly, rolling his eyes. "Or what, Josh? You'll throw another tantrum? You're embarrassing the family name. If you just step down quietly today, take a leave of absence, let Carter handle things, maybe Dad will help you pay for some therapy out of the family trust." I looked at Dylan. He wasn't trying to help. He was actively trying to establish absolute dominance. He wanted me broken, humiliated, and financially dependent, just like the rest of the family. He wanted to secure his spot as the sole heir, making absolutely sure I never outshined him again. "Family issues should stay private, Joshua," Dylan added, his tone hardening from fake concern to a genuine threat. "Don't go to that meeting today. Don't make a fool of yourself. Let Carter take over. It's for the best. Private." That word hit me harder than anything else. In our deeply dysfunctional family, private meant silence. Private meant obedience. Private meant letting them abuse you in the dark, letting them tear you apart piece by piece, so they could look like perfect saints in the light of day. I looked at my father's smug, completely unbothered face. I looked at Dylan's arrogant sneer, and in that exact moment, the very last, fraying thread of familial obligation inside my chest simply snapped. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt incredibly light. I felt free. I stood up slowly from the booth. I reached into my wallet and dropped a crisp $20 bill on the table to cover the coffees. "I'm done," I said. My father raised a mocking eyebrow. "Done with what?" "Breakfast." "Done with you?" I said softly, looking at them like they were strangers I had just met. "No more holidays. No more phone calls. No more pretending you are a father and you are a brother. You are dead to me." My father's face darkened instantly. The mask of the concerned patriarch slipped, revealing the furious tyrant underneath. "If you walk out that door, you will regret it, Joshua. I promise you that. I will make sure you have nothing." "I don't think I will," I said. I turned my back on them and walked out of the diner. I got into my Porsche, the engine roaring to life, and drove toward the downtown office building. The storm was finally here, and I was holding the lightning. The main conference room at the downtown revitalization project was a massive, intimidating space enclosed in floor-to-ceiling glass, overlooking the bustling city square below. When I pushed the heavy oak double doors open at exactly 11:55 a.m., 5 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to start, the room fell dead silent. 12 board members were seated around the massive mahogany table. Carter sat right at the head of the table, leaning back in his leather chair, looking incredibly pleased with himself. Nathan sat to his right, nervously shuffling a thick stack of papers. Qley sat nervously in the corner, tasked with taking the official minutes, aggressively refusing to look up from her glowing laptop screen. But the real kicker, the detail that made my blood run cold, was the 2 guest chairs positioned against the back wall. My father and Dylan were sitting there. They had come to watch the execution live. They wanted front row seats to my destruction. "Joshua," Carter barked, his voice dripping with false authority as he stood up. "You were explicitly instructed in writing not to attend this meeting. This is a closed executive session regarding your disciplinary action and removal." I didn't stop walking. I didn't acknowledge him. I moved calmly to the empty chair at the opposite end of the long table and stood quietly behind it, resting my hands on the leather back. "I have a right to face my accusers, Carter," I said, my voice echoing loudly in the large, tense room. I looked past him directly at my father. "Isn't that right, Robert? Or do you only whisper your poison behind closed doors?" My father immediately stood up, placing a hand dramatically on his chest. He looked around the table at the board members with wide, mournful eyes. "Please, everyone, see for yourselves. He's hostile. He's confrontational. I only came today because I feared for your safety. He needs a psychiatric intervention, not a seat at this executive table." Several board members murmured in agreement, nodding sympathetically at my father. Carter picked up a wooden gavel and slammed it down on a coaster. "That is enough," Carter declared, his chest puffed out. "Based on the credible eyewitness report from your own family and your blatant disregard for protocol today, I am calling for an immediate board vote to permanently expel Joshua from the project and officially strip him of his title as lead coordinator." "You can't do that," a voice boomed from the open doorway. Every head in the room turned. Standing in the entrance was Matthew, the billionaire CEO of the Horizon Trust, the massive philanthropic fund that bankrolled our entire community project. He was a towering, terrifying figure in the financial world. Flanking him was Christian, the most ruthless, expensive corporate lawyer in the city, holding a thick leather briefcase. And right behind them stood Wyatt, the security chief, carrying a laptop under his arm. Carter stood up so fast his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "Matthew, sir, we didn't expect you. We are just handling a minor internal personnel issue. It's nothing to concern you. You are handling an illegal coup, Carter," Matthew said coldly, his voice slicing through the room as he walked in. Christian the lawyer moved swiftly to the front of the room and unclasped his briefcase with a loud click. My father looked confused, his brow furrowed. "Excuse me, who are you people? My son is very unwell. This is a private family matter that has spilled over." Matthew stopped walking and looked at my father like he was a disgusting stain on the expensive carpet. "Mr. Robert, you have made a severe, catastrophic miscalculation regarding exactly who your son is." Carter wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. "Matthew, please. Joshua's behavior has been erratic and dangerous. We are simply removing him from the payroll to protect the fund's assets." Christian, the lawyer, let out a dry, chilling, humorless laugh. He pulled a thick stack of legal documents from his briefcase and tossed them onto the mahogany table. They slid perfectly down the center, stopping right in front of Carter. "Joshua isn't on the payroll, Carter," Christian said, adjusting his glasses and staring the man down. "Joshua doesn't work for the fund. Joshua owns the fund." The silence in that boardroom was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. It was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning unit. Carter's face went completely, sickly white. All the blood drained from his cheeks. Qley stopped typing mid-keystroke, her jaw dropping open in pure shock. My father and Dylan froze, their eyes locked in terror on the legal documents sitting on the table. Horizon Trust is a shell corporation, Matthew explained slowly, looking around the stunned table, making sure everyone understood the gravity of the situation. It was established 3 years ago by an anonymous angel investor to bypass city bureaucracy and fund community projects directly. Joshua is that investor. He has personally injected $4 million of his own wealth into this project. He isn't the lead coordinator. He is the boss. You can't fire him, Carter. You work for him. You all work for him. I watched my father's face. The smugness, the arrogance, melted away instantly, replaced by utter shock, then creeping horror, and finally, sheer panic. The narrative he had controlled his entire life, the lies he had spun to keep me beneath him, had just been violently ripped from his hands. That's impossible, Dylan stammered from the back of the room, his voice cracking. He's just an IT guy. He doesn't have that kind of money. I strongly suggest you sit down and shut your mouth, young man, Christian snapped, glaring at Dylan, before I have security physically remove you from the premises. I finally spoke, my voice calm and steady. Carter, you wanted to vote based on an eyewitness report. I think we should review the actual evidence before we conclude this meeting. Wyatt stepped forward, plugged his laptop into the boardroom projector system, and hit play. The massive screen on the wall lit up. It was the security footage from the hall. High definition, clear, crisp audio. The entire board sat in stunned silence as they watched my father yell his insult. They watched me smile calmly and walk away. They watched the absolute truth. Then the footage skipped forward. The audio crackled, and Dylan's treacherous voice filled the boardroom. Go talk to Nathan. Tell him Joshua was acting erratic. If you say he's unstable, it goes on record. It'll ruin his standing. I'll back up everything you say. And then, my father's damning response. Unstable. Yes, that works perfectly. The video ended. The screen went black. The board members stared at my father and Dylan with absolute, unmasked disgust. Nathan looked physically sick, holding his stomach. Carter looked like he was going to pass out in his chair. I looked at my father. He was visibly shaking, his hands trembling at his sides. His eyes darted frantically around the room, desperately looking for a way out, looking for someone, anyone, to manipulate. But there was no one left to fool. The lights were on, the truth was out, and the cockroaches were exposed. Nathan, I said calmly, breaking the silence. Delete the incident report from the system. Why, yes, sir. Immediately, sir. I'm so sorry, Nathan stammered, pulling his laptop open with shaking hands. Carter, I continued, turning my gaze to the man who had tried to steal my work. Clear out your desk. You have exactly 1 hour to vacate the premises. Christian will hand you your termination papers on your way out. Carter opened his mouth to speak, to beg, to explain, but no sound came out. He just nodded dumbly, his face ashen, and stumbled toward the door. I turned my gaze to the back of the room, locking eyes with the two men who shared my blood. Wyatt, escort Robert and Dylan off my property. If they ever step foot in a building funded by Horizon Trust again, have them arrested for criminal trespassing. My father took a step forward, reaching a trembling hand out toward me. Joshua, please, son, let's talk about this. I'm not your son, I said, my voice echoing with crushing finality. I'm done. Get out. The fallout was immediate, brutal, and spectacular. As Wyatt roughly escorted my father and Dylan out of the glass doors, the boardroom erupted into chaos. Nathan rushed over to me, practically tripping over his own feet in his desperation. Joshua, Mr. Joshua, I am so deeply sorry. I swear to you I was lied to. I just followed standard safety protocol, I swear. I never actually believed it. Save it, Nathan? I said, calmly packing up the legal folders and sliding them back toward Christian. You didn't ask me for my side of the story. You didn't investigate. You just blindly pulled the trigger because it was the easy thing to do. You're on strict probation for the next 6 months. One more mistake, one more lack of judgment, and you're gone. I walked out of the boardroom, leaving the remaining members in stunned silence. Qley was waiting for me in the hallway, looking completely desperate, tears streaming down her face. Josh! Oh my God, Josh, I had absolutely no idea, she cried, reaching out to grab my arm. Carter threatened my salary. He told me I'd be fired. You know, I always supported you, right? We're a team. We built this together. I stopped. I looked down at her hand clutching my sleeve. Then I looked up at her tear-stained face. You protected yourself, Qley. You panicked, and you threw me under the bus to save your own skin. I get it. Survival instinct. But do not stand here and pretend we're a team. A team stands together when things get hard. Go back to your desk. I walked past her, ignoring her sobs, and took the private executive elevator down to the underground parking garage. The intense rush of adrenaline was slowly leaving my system, leaving behind a deep, profound sense of quiet. The war was finally over. I had cut the toxic infection out of my life permanently. When the elevator doors opened into the dim, concrete garage, I saw them. My father and Dylan were standing right next to my Porsche. Wyatt was standing a few feet away, arms crossed over his massive chest, making sure they didn't touch the car. Dylan saw me walking toward them and immediately stepped forward, his hands raised in a frantic gesture of surrender. Josh, wait. Man, please wait. Dylan pleaded, his voice cracking loudly. He looked terrified. The arrogant golden boy was completely gone. You have to understand, Dad made me say those things. He manipulated me into it. You know exactly how he is. He's sick. He threatened to cut me out of the inheritance if I didn't help him frame you. It wasn't my idea, Josh. I swear to God. I stopped in my tracks. I looked at my brother. Here he was, the golden child, throwing our father directly under the bus without a second thought, desperately trying to save his own skin now that he knew I was the one with the real money and power. My father stood behind him, his shoulders slumped. He looked older, smaller, and more pathetic than he ever had in his entire life. The look of pure betrayal on Robert's face as he listened to his favorite son eagerly sell him out was almost poetic. It was the perfect, bitter harvest of the seeds he had planted his whole life. You did it to yourself, Dylan, I said, clicking my keys and unlocking the car with a sharp chirp. Josh, please. I'm your brother. You're a millionaire, man. You can't just cut me off. I need help with my mortgage. Dad is broke. He can't help me. I opened the heavy door to the Porsche. I looked at both of them, two men who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. You two deserve exactly what you have, I said. Each other. I slid into the driver's seat, pulled the door shut, and started the engine. I didn't look at them as I put the car in gear, drove out of the dark garage, and pulled into the bright, warm sunlight. The human ego is an incredibly fragile structure. When you spend your entire adult life building your reputation on a foundation of lies, subtle manipulation, and stolen credit, it only takes one pulled thread to bring the whole massive house of cards crashing down. For my father, Robert, and my older brother, Dylan, that singular thread was pulled in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the city square. And the resulting collapse was nothing short of spectacular. A full month passed since the day I walked out of that underground concrete parking garage, leaving the two of them standing next to my Porsche in absolute, stunned silence. During those 30 days, I did exactly what I promised myself I would do in that diner. I cut them off completely. I blocked their cell phone numbers. I routed their emails directly to a trash folder. I formally instructed Wyatt and the entire security team at my downtown office building to deny them entry under any circumstances, threatening trespassing charges if they ever stepped foot on the property. I didn't want revenge in the traditional cinematic sense. I didn't want to drive to my father's house, kick his front door open, and scream at him until my throat bled. I didn't want to actively ruin them. I just wanted them completely out of my atmosphere. I wanted to breathe clean air again. But silence has a strange, incredibly powerful effect on a community. Without me reacting publicly, without a convenient target for my father to project his false narrative onto, all the attention in our neighborhood slowly and inevitably shifted back onto him. The news of what exactly happened at the Downtown Revitalization Project board meeting leaked. It always does. You simply cannot have the billionaire CEO of the Horizon Trust and a top-tier corporate lawyer walk into a community center, declare a hostile boardroom takeover entirely illegal, fire an executive, and expect 12 board members to keep their mouths shut. People talk. Human nature dictates it. Carter, in his bitter humiliation after being escorted out of the building with his termination papers, desperately tried to spin the story to save his own dying reputation. He blamed my father. Carter told anyone who would listen that he was a victim of a vicious family dispute, that Robert had intentionally fed him false information about my mental health. Carter's pathetic excuses only served to highlight my father's malicious lies to the entire community. The people who had once respected my father, the neighbors who used to wave at him and ask for his advice on their lawns, began to ask the hard questions they should have asked years ago. Why was there no actual physical evidence of my supposed violent breakdown at the family party? Why had the incident report been filed secretly with the organizers, long after the argument ended? Why had Robert looked so genuinely eager to destroy his own son's philanthropic career? Those uncomfortable questions spread quietly through the neighborhood block parties, the local country club, and the Sunday morning coffee shops. And once that carefully crafted narrative of the perfect, caring patriarch collapsed, people started looking backward. Patterns became glaringly visible. Old, deeply buried stories suddenly surfaced in hushed conversations. The very first real domino to fall was my brother, Dylan, the golden child. 2 weeks after the explosive board meeting, I was sitting in my corner office, quietly reviewing a stack of new vendor contracts for the community fund, when my private desk phone rang. It was Elijah. "Turn on your private encrypted voicemail line right now," Elijah said, his voice laced with a dark, satisfied amusement. "You have a message from your golden brother. It seems his chickens have finally come home to roost, and they are hungry." I put Elijah on speakerphone, leaned back in my leather chair, logged into the secure voicemail portal I used exclusively for unlisted numbers, and hit play. Dylan's voice instantly filled my quiet office. He sounded frantic. He sounded exhausted. He sounded completely stripped of that smug, arrogant confidence he had worn like a crown his entire life. "Josh, hey man, it is Dylan. Look, I know you blocked my personal cell, so I am calling your direct office line. I need you to call me back immediately. It is an absolute emergency. I lost my job today, Josh. I was literally up for a massive promotion at the financial firm next week. But human resources pulled me into a closed-door meeting this morning with the senior partners. They said, Carter, yeah, the guy you fired from the community board is old college friends with one of our managing directors." Carter told them everything. He told them I actively conspired to file a fraudulent security report to ruin an executive at the Horizon Trust. They called it a massive corporate liability and a severe breach of professional ethics. They fired me on the spot, Josh. Security walked me out with a cardboard box. My salary is completely gone. I can't even afford a lawyer to fight the wrongful termination. I have exactly 2 months left in my savings before I default on my mortgage and lose the house. Dad won't even pick up the phone when I call. He is completely broke. The inheritance he always bragged about holding over our heads, the money he used to control us, it is practically nothing. He leveraged his house to the hilt years ago to keep up appearances. Josh, please, I am begging you. I need a loan. I need my brother. Please call me back. I listened to the message end with a sharp, electronic beep. I stared at the phone on my desk for a long, silent moment. Dylan had willingly, eagerly participated in a plot to completely destroy my good name. He had whispered poison into our father's ear just to secure his place as the favorite son. And now, He wanted me to open my wallet and bail him out of the direct consequences of his own treachery. Well, Elijah asked through the speakerphone, breaking the silence. Are you going to call him back and play the hero? No, I said flatly, my voice devoid of any emotion. Delete the message from the server entirely. Block this number too. If he shows up at the lobby of this building, have Wyatt escort him away to the sidewalk. Let him figure out his own mortgage. I didn't feel a single ounce of guilt. Dylan was a grown man in his 30s. He made his choice in that security footage. He chose his side. But Dylan's spectacular corporate firing was just a localized tremor. The real earthquake, the event that finally shattered my father's standing in the community forever, happened a week later at the monthly city council ward meeting. The ward meetings were usually incredibly boring, tedious affairs held in the local high school gymnasium. They dealt with mundane issues like commercial zoning laws, pothole repairs, and neighborhood watch schedules. My father always, without fail, attended these meetings. He loved to sit right in the front row, wearing a tailored tweed jacket, nodding thoughtfully at the speakers, and acting like the unofficial, highly respected mayor of the neighborhood. He went to this particular meeting hoping to project an image of calm stability. He was desperately hoping to prove that the nasty rumors swirling about him were just vicious, unfounded gossip. I wasn't there to witness it, but Uncle John was sitting 3 rows back, and he called me that night to give me a minute-by-minute breakdown of the absolute massacre that occurred on that gymnasium floor. During the open public comment section, where citizens could address the council, a man stood up from the back bleachers and walked slowly to the microphone standing in the center aisle. It was Luke. Luke was the close family friend my father had systematically, ruthlessly destroyed 10 years ago. The man who lost his thriving small business, suffered a brutal divorce, and endured a nightmare custody battle over his children, all because my father had decided to spread toxic whispers about his mental stability after a minor, meaningless disagreement at a funeral. Luke looked older now. His hair was completely gray, and the lines on his face told a story of a decade of hard, unfair struggle. But he stood tall. He gripped the microphone stand with both hands, looked directly down at the front row where my father was sitting, and cleared his throat. The squeaky wooden floor of the gymnasium went completely quiet. My name is Luke, he started, his voice steady, echoing loudly off the folded bleachers. Most of you in this room know me, or at least you used to. Some of you stopped talking to me a decade ago. I am here tonight because the truth has a very funny way of demanding the light, even if it takes 10 long years to finally get there. Uncle John said my father physically stiffened in his metal folding chair. He tried to put on his usual, practiced mask of polite confusion, looking around the room as if to say, "Is this guy crazy?" But his hands were gripping his knees so hard his knuckles were stark white. 10 years ago, right after my father's funeral, I had a disagreement with Robert, Luke continued, lifting a hand and pointing a finger directly at my father's face. A week later, rumors started spreading through this very neighborhood that I was unstable, that I was a massive financial risk. Those rumors, started by that man sitting right there, cost me my livelihood. They cost me my marriage. They cost me the college fund I had saved for my kids. I spent years thinking it was just bad luck. But recently, a story came out about Robert trying to do the exact same thing to his own flesh and blood at the downtown revitalization project. He used the exact same words on his son. He filed a fake report calling his own boy a safety threat, just because his son walked away from an argument. It was a playbook. A loud, collective murmur rolled through the crowded gymnasium. People actively turned in their metal seats to stare directly at Robert. My father jumped up from his chair. He tried to use his deep, calm, authoritative voice, the primary weapon he had wielded so effectively to control people for decades. "Excuse me, Mr. Chairman," my father called out to the council members sitting on the stage. "This is highly inappropriate. This man is clearly still holding on to old grievances and is disrupting a civil community meeting with baseless slander. I ask that he be removed." "It is not slander if there is video evidence of you doing it, Robert," a woman shouted from the back bleachers. It was Aunt Sarah. The ultimate fair-weather friend, the woman who had called me to feign sympathy while secretly feeding information to my father, had officially switched sides to survive the social fallout. She was throwing him to the wolves to save her own reputation. Luke didn't back down an inch. He stepped away from the microphone and walked closer to the front row, looking down at my father. You operate in the shadows, Robert. You smile in people's faces, you pretend to care about them, and you slit their throats when they turn around. You are a coward. You destroyed my life because of a bruised ego, and you tried to destroy Joshua's life out of pure, bitter jealousy because he became twice the man you ever were. But your son was stronger than you. He beat you at your own game. And now, everyone in this entire room knows exactly what you are. My father stood there, breathing heavily. He looked around the gymnasium. He looked at the faces of his neighbors, his Sunday golf partners, the people he had manipulated and controlled for years. There was no sympathy in their eyes. There was no benefit of the doubt. There was no one rushing to defend his honor. There was only absolute, unadulterated disgust. For the very first time in his entire life, Robert had absolutely no control over the room. He couldn't gaslight 100 people who already knew the punchline to his sick, twisted joke. His invisible power was gone. Uncle John told me my father didn't say another word. He didn't try to defend himself. He just lowered his head, grabbed his tweed coat from the back of the chair, and walked quickly down the center aisle toward the gym exit. People actually pulled their knees back and turned their shoulders to avoid touching him as he passed by. The empire of lies was officially reduced to ash. A few weeks after the spectacular town hall incident, the Horizon Trust hosted its massive annual charity gala. This was the undisputed crown jewel event of the year for the city's philanthropic and business circle. It was held in the grand ballroom of the city's oldest, most prestigious luxury hotel. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the soaring, vaulted ceilings. Expensive champagne flowed freely from crystal towers, and the room was filled with the most influential people in the state: politicians, business tycoons, and community leaders. For the first 3 years of the fund's existence, I had attended this gala strictly anonymously. I would wear a standard, unremarkable black suit, stand near the back by the catering doors, and quietly watch the community leaders celebrate the grants, the new buildings, and the projects my money had funded. I vastly preferred the shadows. Growing up in my family, I was taught that standing out only made you a target. I genuinely thought hiding my success was the only logical way to protect it from my father's relentless greed and my brother's toxic envy. But this year was fundamentally different. This year, there were no more shadows left to hide in. The secret was out. And more importantly, as I looked at myself in the mirror that evening, I realized I didn't want to hide anymore. I had done nothing wrong. I had absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. I arrived at the Grand Hotel in the black Porsche, handing the keys to the valet under the bright marquee lights. I was wearing a custom-tailored, midnight blue tuxedo that fit perfectly. Elijah walked through the revolving doors right beside me, wearing a sharp charcoal suit, looking around the opulent lobby and grinning like a shark who smelled blood in the water. The moment we stepped through the heavy brass double doors into the grand ballroom, the energy of the entire room shifted. But it wasn't the tense, suffocating, terrifying silence of that terrible family gathering in the cheap community hall. This was a wave of genuine, authentic, undeniable respect. People turned their heads and smiled warmly. Powerful business leaders, city council members, and dedicated project volunteers actively stepped forward, parting the crowd to shake my hand. Nathan, the community organizer who had nearly ruined my career by blindly following my father's lies, was standing near the grand entrance managing the VIP guest lists. When he saw me walking toward him, he immediately stood up straight, his face flushing with a complex mix of deep respect and lingering, painful embarrassment. "Mr. Joshua," Nathan said, extending his hand quickly, his voice slightly nervous. "It is an absolute honor to have you here tonight, sir. I wanted to let you know that the downtown revitalization project is up 20% in volunteer engagement since you officially took the helm. The new systems are working perfectly. Keep up the good work, Nathan, I said, shaking his hand firmly, offering him a genuine smile. The new budget allocations you drafted last week were solid. Let's keep the momentum going for the next quarter. He beamed with visible relief. Qley, my former assistant, was nowhere to be seen in the ballroom. I heard from the corporate grapevine that she had quietly resigned from her position and moved to a different city after her professional reputation took a massive hit for aligning with Carter's failed, illegal coup. Carter himself was currently facing a quiet, ruthless legal investigation spearheaded by Christian regarding the potential embezzlement of project funds during his brief stint as interim director. The trash had completely taken itself out, leaving the project cleaner than ever. An hour into the elegant evening, the main ballroom lights dimmed slightly, bathing the room in a warm golden glow. Matthew, the towering CEO of the Horizon Trust, stepped up to the grand wooden podium on the main stage. The room fell completely silent as he tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, Matthew began, his deep, resonant voice carrying easily across the opulent room. For 3 incredible years, the Horizon Trust has operated with a single, unwavering mission: to empower this amazing city from the ground up. We have built safe parks for our children, funded small businesses to keep our local economy thriving, and saved community centers from demolition. But for those 3 years, the visionary behind this entire operation chose to remain completely anonymous. He wanted the hard work to speak for itself. He didn't want the glory. But recently, circumstances required him to step into the light and rightfully claim the incredible legacy he built with his own 2 hands. Matthew paused and looked directly at my table near the front. He is a man of immense personal integrity, brilliant financial foresight, and above all, extraordinary, unmatched grace under fire. Please welcome the founder and primary benefactor of the Horizon Trust, Joshua. The ballroom erupted into applause. It wasn't polite golf claps. It was genuine, thunderous, standing room only applause. I stood up, buttoned my tuxedo jacket, and walked confidently toward the stage. I didn't feel the paralyzing, suffocating anxiety I used to feel whenever my father forced his critical attention on me. I felt grounded. I felt incredibly present in my own body. I took the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out over the sea of smiling faces. Thank you, Matthew, I said, my voice steady, clear, and echoing perfectly. When I started this fund 3 years ago, I wanted to prove something to myself. I wanted to prove that you don't need to tear other people down to build something monumental. I wanted to prove that true power doesn't live in manipulation, or deceit, or making others feel small. True power lives in the quiet, consistent, daily work of building a foundation so strong, so deeply rooted in truth, that no amount of wind and no amount of lies can ever blow it down. I paused, looking across the room, letting the weight of the words sink in. There are people in this world who will look you in the eye and try to convince you that you will never amount to anything. They will try to project their own bitter failures, their own deep insecurities, and their own profound sadness onto you. But their words only have power if you accept them as your truth. I chose to build my own truth. And looking around this magnificent room tonight, looking at the vibrant community we have strengthened together, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that I made the right choice. Thank you all for believing in the work. The applause that followed was deafening. It washed over me, warm, validating, and incredibly healing. I shook Matthew's hand firmly and walked off the stage, feeling a profound, heavy sense of absolute closure settling into my bones. As I made my way back to my table, navigating slowly through the dense crowd of well-wishers and handshakes, I stopped near the heavy velvet curtains that led to the dimly lit coat check hallway. Standing there in the shadows, holding a cheap plastic cup of tap water, completely isolated from the glamour and joy of the main room, was my father. I honestly don't know how he got in. He must have purchased a general admission ticket online under a fake name, desperately wanting to be in the exact same room as the wealth, power, and status he had craved so deeply his entire life. He looked absolutely terrible. He had aged 10 years in a single stressful month. His posture, usually so rigid, proud, and commanding, was deeply slumped. The expensive suit he wore looked slightly too big for him now, hanging loosely on his thinning frame. The confident, terrifying patriarch of my childhood was completely gone. In his place was just a sad, bitter, broken old man who had successfully alienated every single person who had ever loved him. He saw me looking at him. His eyes widened slightly in the dim light. He took a hesitant, trembling step forward, his mouth opening. I could see the desperate, calculating gears turning in his head. He was looking for an angle. He was hoping for an argument, a confrontation, a screaming match, anything that would give him an ounce of relevance in my life again. He wanted me to yell at him so he could play the tragic victim to whoever was walking by. He wanted me to pity him so he could find a crack in my armor and crawl his way back into my bank accounts. I stood there in the hallway for exactly 3 seconds. I looked at the man who had tormented my childhood, who had stolen my college fund to give to his golden child, who had empowered my brother's cruelty, and who had actively, maliciously tried to destroy my adult life and my reputation. I waited for the burning anger to rise in my chest. I waited for the bitter resentment. I waited for that old, familiar childhood fear. But there was nothing, absolutely nothing. I felt an overwhelming, peaceful wave of pure, unadulterated indifference. He was a complete stranger to me now, a ghost from a past life that no longer held any legal or emotional jurisdiction over my reality. I didn't smile at him. I didn't frown. I didn't say a single solitary word. I simply looked right through him as if he were made of glass, turned my body, and walked back into the bright light of the ballroom to join my friends. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The silence said everything that ever needed to be said. And this time it was my silence. The drive home that night was, without a doubt, the most peaceful, liberating drive of my entire life. I had the windows of the Porsche rolled down halfway, letting the cool, crisp midnight air rush into the quiet cabin. The towering city lights blurred into beautiful streaks of gold and red as I navigated the empty downtown streets. The deep, powerful hum of the engine was a comforting, steady rumble beneath me. I gripped the leather steering wheel, feeling the physical, undeniable reality of the incredible life I had built with my own hands. I thought about the long, painful journey that had brought me to this exact moment in time. For the vast majority of my life, I genuinely believed that my silence was a glaring sign of weakness. Every single time my father belittled my achievements, every time Dylan took credit for my ideas, every time my mother turned a blind eye to the emotional abuse happening right in front of her, I stayed quiet. I swallowed the burning injustice because I thought fighting back meant I had to play their twisted game. I thought if I didn't scream and shout and demand the respect I was owed, it meant I was a coward. I used to lay awake late at night, staring at the ceiling, running fake arguments in my head. I would imagine the perfect, devastating comeback that would finally make my father stop in his tracks and respect me. I wanted to force him to see my worth. I wanted to force him to love me the way a father should. But as I drove through the quiet city, I realized that was a dangerous trap. You cannot force a toxic person to respect you, because their lack of respect has absolutely nothing to do with your actual value, and everything to do with their own deep, unfixable brokenness. When my father stood in that cheap community hall and yelled, "You'll never amount to anything," in front of 50 people, he wasn't making a prediction about my future. He was making a desperate, pathetic confession about his own deep-seated terror. He was terrified that I would outgrow him. He was terrified that I didn't need his money, his approval, or his permission to succeed. When I looked at him that night, smiled calmly, and said, "Maybe you're right," I wasn't surrendering to his abuse. I was stepping off the battlefield entirely. I was dropping the rope in his endless, exhausting game of emotional tug-of-war. Because the ultimate truth is this: silence is not weakness. When you are dealing with a covert manipulator, a narcissist who feeds on your emotional reactions, silence is the ultimate display of patience and power. Silence is a mirror. When you absolutely refuse to react, when you refuse to give them the dramatic, messy explosion they are desperately trying to provoke, You force them to sit alone with their own toxicity. You force them to overplay their hand, just like my father did when he panicked and filed that fraudulent security report. He was so desperate for a reaction that he literally destroyed his own life, his own reputation, and his own family trying to get one. Sometimes the most satisfying, the most devastating revenge in the world is simply stepping aside and letting the absolute truth speak for itself. Letting the false narrative they built collapse under its own heavy, rotting weight. I pulled into my long driveway and killed the engine. The house was dark, quiet, and perfectly, wonderfully mine. I didn't have to check my phone for angry, manipulative texts. I didn't have to brace myself for passive-aggressive phone calls from Aunt Sarah. I was entirely free. He was right in a twisted sort of way. I never did amount to the broken, subservient version of a son he desperately wanted me to be. I amounted to something far greater. I amounted to myself. Here is the hard truth about toxic family dynamics that society almost never wants to talk about. Sharing DNA with someone does not obligate you to share your peace of mind with them. So many of us fall into the dangerous sunk cost fallacy of family. We think that because we have known these people our entire lives, because we share a last name, we have to endure their emotional abuse, their quiet manipulation, and their constant, draining disrespect. We let them drain our energy, sabotage our career success, and dictate our self-worth simply because society tells us that family is everything. But family is not supposed to be a battlefield. A healthy family is not supposed to be a place where you constantly have to defend your reality against gaslighting, jealousy, and covert narcissism. If a parent or a sibling is systematically trying to dismantle your confidence or ruin your professional reputation behind your back, they are not acting like family. They are acting like a liability, and you treat a liability by cutting it loose. You have the absolute, undeniable right to protect your legacy, your hard work, and your mental health. You have the right to stand up from the table and walk away when respect is no longer being served. Walking away to protect your sanity doesn't make you a bad son, a bad daughter, or a bad sibling. It makes you a survivor who finally woke up and realized their own incredible worth. I want to ask you all a question. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member or a manipulative friend to protect your own peace? How did it change your life when you finally stopped playing their game and took your power back? I genuinely want to hear your stories in the comments below. We learn from each other's strength. Or, if this story resonated with you, if it made you feel seen, simply comment the word good below so I know that sharing this painful journey brought some real value and education to your day. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Stay strong, protect your peace, and remember, never let anyone else hold the pen when it comes to writing the story of your life.